Hi everyone and welcome. Today's podcast is going to be all about observerships because of all the questions we've had from our followers on social media. I'm Dr. Sasha.
And I'm Dr. Caroline.
And we are Code U Australia, where we help people revive, survive and thrive in their medical careers.
Okay, Observership Program. Lots to unpack here. So overall, we've got our thoughts on it. We're going to give you the pros, the cons. We're also going to give you strategies along the way on how to get the most out of the Observership Program if you are somebody that is going to do the Observership Program.
And I think we have different perspectives on it. I've worked with a lot of observers in a team, but I haven't actually done the Observership Program. You haven't either.
No, I haven't done the Observership Program. I've had quite a few IMG friends that have done the Observership Program.
And did you have a lot to do with it in your med ed role?
Yep, I have a bit to do with it. I've done interviewing for the Observership Program and just facilitating a few tutorials and overseeing them and guiding them and catching up with them. So
Before we go through the structure of the program and what it entails, what about the interview? Would you say that that's like a normal job interview, or
yes, 100%.
It's the same format as a job interview?
It's the same format as a job interview.
Scary.
So they're going to ask you a few clinical questions, but they're also just seeing if you're job ready, in the sense that you've got all the things that if you were to get the interview after the observership, are you ready to go? And you were granted a job. Are you ready to go? Like, you've got your recency of practice, you've got your English test, you've got your criminal history check, all those things that any other candidate for a job have to have.
So is it more just the logistical things that they ask, or do they actually ask things like a normal job interview?
They ask like a normal job interview.
Okay.
So tell me a bit about yourself, why this hospital. And they also might throw in a question in there to see if you would be willing to move to that hospital if you got a job, but more importantly, if you were willing to stay long term. So kind of ask you personal questions to see if you've got the longevity, like, oh, okay, and have you got ties to this state, or could you see yourself living here? Because they're trying to filter through who would actually be a good candidate for employment. So the idea is that the Observership Program, you get candidates and it's like your little pool, your little hiring pool. So the idea is that you want to interview and you want to approve IMGs that are sort of ready to work if they got a job.
Okay. Well, I didn't know it was so serious, the interview.
Yeah, it actually is.
That's a bit nerve-wracking.
And it's serious for the hospitals that generally have IMGs that run the hospital, that have more than 50% of IMG doctors. So this is another little way of them getting candidates for interviews and getting IMGs. So they do take it seriously. Maybe other hospitals that don't really need IMGs would probably be a little bit more lighthearted with the interview for the Observership Program, because ultimately at the end of the program, they don't really need you.
So what is the Observership Program? And why do some people do it and some people don't do it? Like, what's the value in it?
So the Observership Program is a weekly, it's a program, it's a weekly attendance by an IMG doctor, and they rotate in different departments, and it varies from hospital to hospital because it's a program that the hospital comes up with. So if one particular hospital wants to run this program over 8 weeks, and every 2 weeks you change departments, like you might be 2 weeks in emergency, 2 weeks in surgery, 2 weeks in medicine, or another hospital might do it over 13 weeks and you change every 4 weeks. So it's a program where they take an IMG, they put him in a department, in a unit, and they follow a team and they literally do what it's called observing. So
kind of like med students.
It's almost exactly like a medical student. Yep. I think they need to even have the same level of insurance, indemnity insurance, as a medical student.
Okay. And can they do certain clinical tasks or see patients?
So it depends on the program at the hospital. Some hospitals will say, yes, you can do the same level as a medical student, so you can take bloods, but it has to be supervised. You can put a cannula in, but it has to be supervised. Other hospitals may say no to that. So just remember, this is a program that's not run by any other organisation. It's run by the hospital itself, and that hospital might have different rules compared to another hospital that's running an observership program.
So different to the work-based assessment program where there's actually set criteria and set assessments, it sounds like the observership program is more hospital specific to that hospital, that they make up the rules really.
They do make up the rules.
Yeah.
Some hospitals will have end of term assessments and an evaluation form to fill out, but some hospitals may be a little bit more laid back with it, a little bit more lenient.
Okay. So you basically apply to this program where you spend a couple of weeks in the hospital that you might end up interviewing for or working in later, and follow people around that you are stationed with, and just learn the ways of the hospital, how it works, and how to practice medicine in that country, I suppose. Is it for people that have never worked in Australia before?
That's right. It's for IMG doctors, and it's for doctors who haven't yet got employment. And so it's this sort of interim thing that you can do between like passing your AMC1 and not having a job. You can sort of do an observership program in between.
How easy is it to get onto an observership program?
Honestly, not that easy. And I'll tell you why. Because let's say a hospital only has 4 terms a year. And so they will only do intakes 4 times a year. And the max maybe they might be able to take observers is 4 every term. So that's 16 people a year at that hospital. Are there a lot of observership programs around the country? No, there isn't. So around the country, you might have like less than 100 observers. So your chances of getting in, like lots apply, and your chances of getting a spot are much lower.
Okay. And that would probably depend on how you interview and
Yes.
things.
Yeah.
The interviews are remote interviews, or?
Yes, especially now with COVID, they are definitely remote. And also the hospitals understand that people across the country travel for observership programs. So a lot of them are remote because of that. You don't have to live in a particular state to apply for their observership program.
Oh, so you could spend the sort of 6 to 8 weeks as an observer staying in that place. Does the hospital pay for your accommodation? Or?
They don't. They don't pay for your accommodation. They don't pay for your flights, but you may be able to access the hospital accommodation at a set fee, which is usually
would be more reasonable.
Yeah, which is usually quite low, but the quality of the accommodation is not that great.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, 6 to 8 weeks, if you were strapped for cash,
Yep.
it would probably make sense.
Yes. Yep.
And then, is this a free program, or like, do some hospitals offer it for free?
Absolutely not. So the reason why it's definitely not free, and the reason being is that the reason a hospital decides, hey, this particular hospital, let's do an observership program, is for 2 reasons. 1, to make money, and 2 is to get their own pool of doctors that they can interview from and hire. Because if you have at least done observership in that particular hospital, then you at least know how that hospital runs. And so you're a little bit more desirable than, say, an external IMG who's never actually been to that hospital before. So absolutely not free, because I'll tell you right now, if they were doing it for free, they would never, ever, ever have a program. Yep. They actually do get money from people paying for the observership program. And this money goes to, say, the administration department, to maybe I'm giving out examples here, but to pay for new training tools or pay for administrational staff members' salaries. So it's definitely a way to make money.
Okay, interesting. And about how much does it cost? Different hospitals charge different amounts?
Yeah, absolutely. Different hospitals do charge different amounts. I've seen some that go for $2,500 right up to $8,800. So they are not cheap. Some of them are not cheap.
Crazy expensive.
Yep.
For 6 to 8 weeks.
Yep.
I suppose the hospitals like it because it's basically like a little pre-employment course for their hospital. If they hire those people, they're already used to the environment.
That's right. And look, some run for more than 6 to 8 weeks. And obviously if they run for longer, they cost more. But hospitals do love it because they get a chance to hire from that pool. So they're creating almost like their own little database of IMG doctors who have at least spent time in their particular hospital and know essentially like the way of the land. They know that this hospital's not paper-based. Oh, sorry, this hospital's not electronic-based. It's paper-based. So they're going to write notes, and referrals are done. You write it on a form and you fax it here. All these little intricate details of what makes you a junior doctor, because, you know, junior doctor, a lot of it is administrational tasks and skills. You at least are familiar with it, that if they were to hire someone who's never even stepped foot in their hospital, they would have to absolutely learn from scratch. Or at least they know with the observers, they've spent time here, they roughly know how it operates.
Yeah, they've paid some money and now they've spent some time in your hospital.
Yeah, that's
quite
right.
desirable.
That's right.
I just don't... So I understand if you have a gap in practice or you don't have a CV that looks that attractive to get your foot in the door using an observership program. But why would you do it? What is the advantage of doing this program? Why would someone seek out a program like this?
Yeah, so there's a couple of advantages. One, it actually puts something on your CV that you're doing that's got relevance to the Australian healthcare system while you're looking for a job. That's pretty important, because I have known people who have a major career gap or like major lack of recency of practice, like years. And they get their foot in the door with the observership program, and that hospital feels confident enough that they can do the job, and they end up getting a job there despite not being the ideal candidate, despite not, you know, having not worked for 3-4 years. So that's why a lot of people do it, because it kind of like gives them an opportunity to at least, you know, fill in a bit of career, you know, they fill in a bit of their career gap, even though it does not technically count as recency of practice. Like according to AHPRA, it doesn't count as recency of practice.
I suppose though it gives you a chance to actually show your worth, because I suppose some people look bad on paper, as in I've got a 8-year practice gap, and then when they actually get into the observership program, they could show people that they actually are pretty competent, just a bit rusty or have some potential.
Yeah, the only issue with showing people that they are competent is that you got to think about how the program runs. So the administration people they're not on the wards. They're sitting in an office, and they rely on feedback from the team that the observer goes to.
Formal feedback?
Formal feedback. So like everyone gets an end of term assessment form and you fill it out, and you know, you might get an observer that has an amazing review. But I have known, and this is rare, but there is a chance that this can happen. I have known of people that were so good that the local doctors actually wrote an email to the director of clinical training saying, you need to hire this person. They're amazing to work with. And that rarely happens, but it does happen. So that's usually becomes reliant on the junior doctor going out of their way to do that for you.
But surely those exceptional candidates wouldn't have had to do the observership program.
No, disagree. Because I see that there are some that are so junior and they have like a career gap, but God, they're so teachable.
Okay.
And they're so personal, and people love talking to them. People love working with them. They're the street smart doctors.
And you'll never glean that from just a piece of paper.
Absolutely
You'd actually
not.
need to work with them to see that.
Yeah, you'd
quality.
never see that on a piece of paper. Like they are miles behind other candidates, but in person, they're like, wow, they're moldable, they're flexible, they're great communicators. They're so fun to be around. They're talkative. They're the ones that have an opportunity to shine beyond their CV. So that's probably the pro. Like it actually is good for those sort of candidates. But like I said, don't want to get everyone's hopes up that a junior doctor will go out of their way or a registrar will go out of their way to email saying this person's been amazing to work with. Because even if they think that about you, a lot of them... It's effort, and they don't really appreciate like how much that will mean to you. Like if you wrote that, because they don't, especially if they're not IMGs, they don't understand the struggle. So, but it is a possibility. So I just want to say that. The second advantage of why someone would do the observership program is the learning environment. So it gives you an opportunity to step foot into the Australian healthcare system and see how it's run, and sort of hear the way the doctors are talking, see how, like, even for example, like the discharge process. Discharge planning is like a whole nother area of medicine that you would not really get overseas.
The term discharge planning was only something I'd heard of here, because for us discharge planning was there's the door, like
Yeah,
goodbye.
we're done with you. Here they will never send a patient home if they don't feel like they can manage themselves at home.
Or even if the patients just don't feel like going home.
Yeah, sometimes if they don't feel like going home, they're like, all right, well, we can't discharge them. So discharge planning is an art of medicine that...
I've seen discharge planning here for low confidence.
Yeah, it's
like the patient can't go home because they don't feel confident to go home. That's like the only reason.
Yeah, well, I've actually had a patient's child ring me up and basically saying, oh, don't discharge them because they live on their own and basically they've burnt bridges with every single family member, including me, so no one's going to actually look after them. I'm like, okay, so you're in a family squabble here and I cannot discharge someone from hospital because you guys don't want to go and look after this elderly patient. Really? Because this patient's annoyed every single family member that no one wants anything to do with them. And I'm like, wow, like this is like you're costing the government money, but I can't send this patient if I don't know that someone's going to at least look after them when they go home. So this is the thing, like you get a chance to do the observership program and just even understand discharge planning and then occupational therapy. They're very integrated into our medicine here. Mm-hmm. So you'll hear them like almost speak another language and you're like, what are they talking about?
That's so true.
Yeah, that's a great opportunity in that learning environment to understand where do they fit in the care of a patient and where they fit into way they communicate with doctors and how we make decisions together, especially like if you go to rehab. So
I suppose, and a lot of these practices are very, they're luxury practices that they're first world things.
Yes.
That you would have never come across. I mean, even having a rehab ward and having sort of fixed people that are there for discharge planning, that care about what kind of home environment you're going into, all completely foreign. Like it's a whole facet that you would never ever have known before.
Yes,
so
exactly.
It is valuable to go through it in like a less pressurizing way. Like you're not working yet, so you don't have any expectations on you. However, you can be in this environment and submerge yourself in it and learn without that pressure of feeling that you actually have to carry out a job as well.
Yes.
You're just there to learn.
Yeah, because when you haven't done an observership program, you're doing all that plus working. So like everything you do counts. So you're trying to figure everything out at the same time. And that's really difficult.
And I think the difference would be for someone that's doing the observership program, they would be, well, this is discharge planning. This is what we do for discharge planning. And someone that's already got the job that didn't have that sort of orientation, the registrar would just say, this patient needs discharge planning.
Yes, that's
right. And you wouldn't know what they're talking about. So you'd have to first learn what it is and then carry it out for the first time, which is a lot of pressure.
Yeah. So saying all this, there's a strategy I would recommend that if you have an observership program coming up, in order to maximize what you get out of the program and make every dollar you paid for it count, there's a couple of things I would focus on prioritizing and setting your own objectives, because just the slight downside of the observership program is that, and we're going to probably talk about this a little bit later on, is that you do go and join a team. Now, this team is run by junior doctors, registrars and consultants, all heavily overworked. And now you, the observer, is coming along, tagging along, asking all a bunch of these questions, and they're already overworked and probably, you may even come across some that are just not even very welcoming of you, because essentially it's like another burden on their shoulders. They don't get paid extra to have you around. So and this is what I see a lot of observers go and they literally just are like a shadow there, and they get whatever they want out of it for 2 weeks, or what they think they've gotten out of it for 2 weeks, and then that's it.
But this is what I mean. So I know nothing about the observership program other than that I've worked with people that are on the program, but there's no set structure for it. So for instance, someone would join our team. We wouldn't know their name. No one would email us and say, there's an observer, joining your team. Or maybe they would email the consultant or the registrar, but certainly not the junior doctors. And it's kind of like having, when you have a lot of med students with you on your team, and it's just almost like you can't get work done because there's so many people around in the way that aren't actually functional parts of the team.
Yeah.
That's how it's sort of felt sometimes with the observers, because you just don't know what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do. So I think as an observer, you should probably make sure that you know what your role is and how much you can do while you're supervised, so that you can integrate better.
I also think, like, even if you knew what they're allowed to do, for example, let's say they're allowed to cannulate, you have to go and watch them cannulate. They take much longer. You're already overworked. You could cannulate this patient like 3.5 seconds and move on to the next task. So it is requiring a little bit more from the junior doctor. But that's okay. Like, at the end of the day, they are not a part of your journey, and your journey is to get a job. So don't worry.
We've all been med students. Yep. So we've all been that annoying person standing in the corner of the room, and we still all got through. Yep. So it's exactly the same.
Yep. So don't focus on them. But what I would say is, don't go in and just shadow and just think, well, this is what I'm here for, shadowing. There's actually a strategy I would suggest on things that you should focus on. So if you get an observership program, I would heavily focus on the following things. So one is, look at how these doctors are writing their patient notes on ward rounds. Go back and actually look through patient folders and read some of the notes, and specifically also read admission notes written by the registrars, because really good ones, you basically just have to copy the format. And this way, like, you can practice even after the program, you can practice at home how to write patient notes, how to write an admission note, because you've been putting this on your list as an objective of things that you want to learn and accomplish for your observership program. You may even get an opportunity halfway through, if you feel a bit confident, to say to your junior doctor, would you mind if I write the notes? Because the medical students can write notes. And then as a junior doctor, we read it and we sign off on them. So on a ward round, if you're comfortable writing notes, also you realize like how quickly you need to write notes on ward rounds, and it's very full on pressurized, like, okay, we need to get through this. So these are great skills that you can learn as an observer if you put this on your list of things to learn.
That's actually such good advice. I think we both did that. I definitely did that when I first started, and I actually made a note on my phone. I still have it, like where I looked at some of the med regs that wrote really good admissions. I would write the structure on my phone. So like they wrote the main complaint, then they wrote, the history of the presenting complaint, and then they wrote the background history and the social history, whatever, like in that order. Yeah. And then I just, for the first few times I admitted patients, I wrote it in that order, and then it becomes second nature after a while. Yep,
exactly. And I still pick up on people's notes, like consultants or senior regs or ATs, where I'm like, oh, I like that part of their format. And I actually then incorporate it. I might change mine a little bit. So I'm always tweaking mine to improve. And that's medicine. You're constantly improving your processes. So that's one thing I would highly suggest to observers. Put that on your list of things to master and learn. And because, like I said, you can definitely practice this after the program's done. The second thing is look at the referral process. So one of the biggest complaints we get about IMGs, so also that they suck at writing patient notes, but also their referrals. Like if they send off a chest x-ray, they're literally like, chest x-ray. And the radiographer just sends it right back. So have a look at how they're writing it. Like, for example, they might go 39-year-old male, bibasal crackles heard, query, rule out, effective process. So that at least tells the radiologist, like, what exactly do you want me to comment on? Especially stuff like CT brains, because they can comment on so many things. Mm-hmm. So what is it that you're particularly interested in? So you need to give them a bit of clinical history, a bit of the symptoms, and then what you want to know.
I think it's quite an art in itself to be able to take these complex patients and large amounts of information and condense it into one or two sentences that really drives your point home. You can't write full notes on every single imaging form or pathology form, but it really takes skill to be able to see all of those long patient notes and be able to write a sentence or two that gets your point across to the radiographer or the pathologist.
Yep.
So, and that's just practice.
Yeah, it does require a skill, but you can at least have a method. Like, you've got to have a
Definitely.
I always say in medicine, you've got to develop a strategy and you've got to develop a process for everything. And then what you do, the more time that you're there, you build on that skill. You build on it. But you need to lay the foundation. And the foundation you're going to get is from seeing the local doctors, how they operate and how they write things.
And see what you like about it, and then see what's going to work for you in the future and build on that.
Yeah. And then the third thing, we talked about it before, is discharge planning. Take real notice of how discharge planning works. Now, if you want to have more questions about discharge planning, you know who the best people ask? It ain't the doctors. it's actually the nurses. The reason being, on your team, you might have 2 junior doctors. On the ward, you have like 30 nurses. So in relative to how many doctors there are, they've got time to answer the question. So if you're nice to the nurses, and I always say this, you treat those nurses like gods, because they literally can make or break your career. But if you're nice to them, they actually go out of their way to teach you things. So asking them like, oh, explain to me how the discharge process works. I'd love to know. And they would explain like, oh, then this happens, then this happens. Also, the same thing goes with the OTs and the physios. So that's really important. The 4th thing I would want to gain from my observership program is understand where the nurses fit in the Australian medical system, because I know overseas nurses are not seen as equal to doctors. We're here, like, I'll be honest, they're treated much better than doctors. And so if you're walking into the Australian healthcare system thinking you can talk down to a nurse, I pray for you. I pray for you, because the director of clinical training will find out, because they're the first people to report. The nurses do report you. So understand how it works, because it's not just one nurse is not equal to the other. Like, we have RNs, which are registered nurses. We have enrolled nurses. We have nurse practitioners. We have NUMs, so nurse unit managers. And we're going to actually do a podcast with a nurse that's going to explain the differences in the hierarchy. So stay tuned for that. But you can actually ask a nurse like, oh, can you explain to me how like the nurses, statuses all work? And what can some nurses do, and what nurses, some nurses can't do. Like, some nurses can't take blood. They 100% would. The fact that a doctor's showing interest in them, they'll be like loving it. They're like, yes, that, because they see it as a sign like you respect them. If you're showing interest in them.
And you're a team player.
Yeah, exactly. Then the next thing I would do is look at how, and look, I'll say this really loosely, but look at how junior doctors are taking bloods and cannulating. Not so much step by step, because I'll be honest, they all suck at it and they all do it poorly. They actually all do it poorly. But more so, look at the equipment at the very least.
And how they gather the equipment, where they get it from.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think how they talk to the patients before they're going to do a procedure.
Yep.
Because even when their procedures suck, they tend to counsel and talk to the patients quite well.
Yeah.
Better than IMGs, I think.
100%.
But even if the procedure goes badly, the patients still have some level of trust because of the conversation they've had before the procedure.
Yeah.
Which is something we are very bad at.
It's like it's like professional manipulation.
It is.
It's not in a sinister way, but like, they've made this patient really think that they've done the best job when really they just did a sucky job.
And they'll be like, oh, your veins are quite... They're quite
floppy.
Small, or they're quite floppy. Oh, we just couldn't reduce the cannula, but that's okay. We'll try again. That patient's like, yep, maybe it is me. I'm the problem.
I am the problem. And that's why doctors are very toxic in relationships. They convince you are the problem, do you see? So that's something. The other thing I would say is the pathology referral form. Now, the referral forms can be, or like the pathology request form, there could be different across the whole country, different hospitals, but they all have the same pieces of information on them. They might just be in a different spot. Have a look at how they fill out the form. So there's a legal way to fill out the form, and just look at that, analyze it. There's 30 forms sitting on a ward a day. Go through it. Have a look at how they're all listed. So that's really important, and that's something you can do as an observer. So even if you're on a team and the junior doctor is not very welcoming of you and probably is like, oh, go to the library and read up on something, and very like trying to get you out of their way.
Don't do that. You can read up on stuff at home.
Exactly. But if you really want to get out of their way, there's so much for you. You like go to the ward clerk, look at the folders of the patients, pull down the patient folders and have a look at their mission notes. Read the notes, see how they're being written.
Do you know what I've noticed throughout all of these suggestions? Not one of these suggestions have something to do with clinical medicine.
No.
Like, nowhere there did you say practice your examination skills or practice taking a history, which are probably good ideas, both of those. But the main core skills that you can get from an observership will make you so much more functional as a doctor if you get hired.
Yeah, you know why? Because when you're doing AMC 1 and you're doing AMC 2, or you've done these AMC prep courses, they teach you all this stuff. They teach you the history side.
You've also spent years as a med student and a doctor in your own country learning all that stuff. And it's really not that different.
No, that part's not different. So I know there isn't a deficit there, but no one teaches you this stuff. Like I keep saying junior doctor is mainly about your administration skills. How good are you organizing? How good are you like organizing referrals, writing discharge summaries? Oh, and that's the other one. Learn a discharge summary, the format of a discharge summary.
That would be very valuable. I was and still am shocking at discharge summaries.
You can even ask one of the junior doctors, one of the discharge summaries that are completed, could you get a printout of it so you can just go over it and see the format? What I would suggest is never take patient notes home. So obviously a discharge summary will have a patient's name on the top right-hand corner. Cut it off and just take the writing home. So nothing that can identify the patient. That's really important. We're really big on confidentiality here, and you never want to breach that as a doctor. So never ever take anything that's got a patient's name on it home. So that's really important, but that's another one. So yes, like I'm not telling you to like learn medicine, because as a junior doctor, when you step foot day one of working, honestly, it's how good are you at communicating and organizing? That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, because the small details you might have missed in your clinical exam or history will be picked up by the registrar, the consultant, the other people that are seeing the patients. It's never just on you, but putting in the forms and writing notes is usually just your responsibility. And if you do it badly, no one's going to help you.
Yeah, that's right. So that's what my strategy would be. Now, the other pro, which is the biggest one, the reason why people want to do the observership program is most observership programs, and I would say most, but double check before you accept a position in the observership program, double check that this is offered to you. At the end of the program, you get to interview for employment at that hospital. So that's huge.
Almost guaranteed.
Yes. So if in the program, they will say, as on the list of the program, they will say interview at the end of the program for an employment. So what they'll say is, if we have a position available and you interview well, you'll be granted the position. And that's a huge thing.
Because so basically what you're saying is you pay this amount of money for an interview.
Yes. So you do. Really, what you...
Still worth every cent, probably.
So put it this way. What the hospital gets out of you, a pool for hiring. What you can get out of the hospital is the interview and also the learning environment if you take the strategies I just spoke about. But really, it's that interview. You are paying for that interview. So I always get asked on social media, are observerships worth it? And personally, my answer is always yes, because that interview is your chance to shine. And it's hard. It's hard to shine on a piece of paper, especially if you are not like a PGY. Like you know, you had a lot of clinical experience before coming here. So if you put my CV next to your CV, like you automatically look so much better than I do. So I don't have...
But then meet us in person.
No, you're still better than me. Come on.
Basically, Kara's saying I'm trash.
Person. But no, you're not. Like you actually, you have that double factor. You're good on paper and you're fantastic in person.
Nice.
But
come back.
It's true. But next to you, my CV, they wouldn't, if they only had like 10 spots and they had 20 applicants, next to you, I wouldn't even stand a chance. But put me in an interview and I'll get the job.
You smash it. Yeah,
I'll smash it.
So true. Yeah.
So, or put me in a working environment and you'll see that, you don't regret your decision to hire me. So I know I'm not good on paper. I know I'm fantastic in person.
And I think it's very valuable, especially with people that have a practice gap. Because that's difficult to overcome.
Yep, it is. It is. And when you're being so heavily judged based off like the ideal candidate criteria, you don't really have that opportunity anywhere else to shine in person, unlike the observership program that gives you that interview. So interview is extremely important. Now, there's a strategy with this that a lot of observers or a lot of IMGs don't understand. If you look at all the observership programs that are offered around the country, some will be worth it more than others. So if they all grant you an interview at the end, please choose the hospital that is mostly run by IMGs.
Like more likely to hire you.
Yes, because they need you. If they don't need you, what has happened is that you've paid money for the observership program and they've gotten you in because they've promised you this interview. But realistically, your chance of getting a position, even if you're a great candidate and you interviewed well, is very, very low because they don't need you.
That's a very good point.
So
that
you
means that
basically just got conned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You basically just got exploited.
Yeah. And look, let's be honest, there's a lot of exploitation for IMGs everywhere.
100%.
Everywhere there is. Even in your courses and your AMC prep courses, there's exploitation everywhere. Especially because, I mean, I know, like, I'm going to say it, like, it really is. And especially because a lot of these aren't IMG people running these things. So, you know, there is, like with anything, if people can see that they can make $1, even though they haven't got the experience or anything to back it, they'll do it.
That's kind of what shocks me about the Observership Program, because you say that it ranges from $2,000 to $8,000 for 6 to 8 week program. That's not really even that structured, with no formal assessments, but at the end you get an interview, and that's why people pay these exorbitant fees for the interview, which I still understand. Like, if I was that desperate, or if I needed to get my foot in the door so badly, I would definitely pay for an interview, because you get that chance to show them. Yeah. But the interview doesn't automatically translate into a job either.
No,
that's something
not
to
if
remember.
You're not smart about it. So I'll give you a scenario, and I want you to answer this question for me. There is a hospital. I'm just talking up fictional here. It's a 6-week program. It's $3,000, but this hospital, like 70 to 80% are local doctors that work there, and a very small portion, maybe 20 to 30% are IMGs. And I'm not just saying junior doctor IMGs, it could be reggers, it could be consultants. So the junior doctor IMG portion of it might even be smaller than 20%, but it's $3,000. It's reasonable money. But there's another hospital, the program is 10 weeks, it's $7,000, but that hospital, more than 50% of their junior doctors are actually IMGs, and this hospital needs IMGs to even function. Otherwise, they don't have enough staff. So both guarantee you an interview. One is almost more than double the cost of the other one. Which one would you go for?
Definitely the hospital that is mostly IMGs, because it means that they need foreign doctors. They need IMGs.
Yeah. So your chance of interviewing and getting the position because they're desperate is a lot higher. So
you're going up against other IMGs instead of going up against all the local grads, which it's bad that it's better for IMGs to compete against each other than to compete against the local graduates.
You're never going to win against the local graduates. You're never going to win.
Yep.
They might.
That's what
maybe
I've
no
learned.
one's told you this. I'm going to tell it, because you need to hear it. You're never going to win. I mean, there's even like career stuff that sometimes I get, disappointed in, because I'm like, I will never win against a local graduate. And I always say, like, I feel that even at my best, it takes a lot for me to be seen better than the average local doctor, So
it's sad, but it is true. And I suppose every country favors their locals.
Look, and every industry has some sort of crap like this. Don't get sad about it. Get smart. Like, it's like, it reminds me of this movie. It's a bit of a tangent, but it reminds me of this movie, First Wives Club. And these are all like wives that were left. It's an amazing movie.
I haven't watched this movie.
Oh, it's so amazing. Bette Midler, is it not Dolly Parton? There's another one. Like, these all classic 80s, 90s actresses. And all their husbands left them for younger models. And it's this whole movie, like, they join forces. And the slogan at the end, and Donald Trump's first wife appeared as a cameo at the end. And it's like, honey, don't get mad, get everything. And the joke, the idea behind that is like, yes, this is how it operates, and we get shafted, but don't get mad, just get smart about it. And that's how the movie, the whole storyline is. These women, instead of getting angry, they all come together and they find a way to beat the system. And so that's what I say. Like, this happens in every industry, but don't get mad. Just know what you're working with, and then strategize it to at least work in your benefit. So the worst thing, I don't know much about war, but the worst thing I can imagine in war is not knowing your opponent, or not knowing what could come up, so you can strategize against it. So that's what I would say is, like, it's disappointing. Sometimes it does get me down, but ultimately I'm just constantly strategizing on how to work around it. Like in a previous podcast that we talked about, like, what's your best chances of getting a job? We talked about, like, look regionally, look rural. And some of these regional rural places are beautiful. They're not like rusty old towns with like red dirt. They're actually amazing coastal towns, but they're the ones that need you. So if they're the ones that got Observership Program, I want you to draw your eyes to them. So with everything, strategize. So when you look at Observership Programs, remember no two are alike. And so strategize which one is the one that you're most likely to get a job if you interviewed there.
And I think certainly it's not bad to gun for specific hospitals if you feel you're a very competitive person and you've got a very competitive CV and you really want to go to metropolitan Melbourne or Sydney. But I mean, those places really don't need you. So if you're the type of person that really wants to just get the best bang for their buck and the best possible chance, give yourself the best possible chance of getting a job, definitely makes more sense to just go where you're needed.
Yep. So only pay that sort of money that if you're going to get more out of it, which means when you do interview, because this is the only way you're going to get stuff out of it, that means if you interview, you're very likely to get a job because they actually need you.
Yeah, like the middle of Sydney and the middle of Melbourne don't need you.
They don't need you. No.
They've got hundreds of applicants.
That's right. They don't need you.
They don't need you for registrar. I mean, even at the point that we are at now, applying for registrar jobs everywhere, I'm not going to go to the middle of Sydney. They don't need me there.
No.
Unless I'm an exceptional candidate and I've got something over the rest of the local grads that are applying there. I'm not going to apply there because I know it's going to be a waste of my time.
Yeah.
You're going to apply to places that you see that you are going to make an impression on them because they need you.
Yeah. I mean, never say never. But
no, never say never.
When people are desperate for employment, they're desperate to get their foot in the door, we need to start thinking about probability.
Exactly.
Not like luck.
Strategic.
You've got to be strategic. And that's one thing I have to say, like we differ to everybody else that gives advice because everyone's like, oh, this is what I did. And like, then yeah, you could do it too. But they don't see, well, why did it work? What you did, why did it work? Was it pure luck or was it because you had X, Y, Z that they seem to be looking for? So we're quite different in the sense that we took strategy.
But there's almost every single process of doing this has its own little strategy.
100%. From
which English test you choose for yourself or, are you going to do the AMC2 or, how do you study for the AMC1? How do you look for a job? There's set things that you can do and look at to make it more probable that you get through all these processes. And it's not just what people feel is the best or, what everyone else's stories that you hear. There are actually rules that you can follow that will give you a better chance of succeeding.
Yes.
And I think the fact that we outline all of those is really good. I mean, this is stuff that we've just learned along the way. I didn't use these strategies myself when getting through here, but when I look back at it, a lot of the successes that I have had is because of accidentally maybe using one or two of these strategies.
Yeah, and I think like you don't use them at the time because you don't even know about them. Like you don't hear about this stuff. So, and this is like why we wanted to do this, because there is a way to make your life easier and we want to share that way. But also like now that I'm on the admin side, I have a newfound appreciation of how it works and what they're thinking and just like, okay, how many positions go up? So when I was
so
working
valuable to have that side.
Yeah, when I was working clinically, like yes, we got a new doctor, but I actually didn't know now on the admin side like how many new recruits we've got per month. So now I'm like, oh, okay, this makes sense. So it's starting to all add up for me, and then I'm like, oh, okay, I now know how it works as the doctor and as the admin person. And combining, there's definitely a strategy you can follow. So
it's going to be so valuable to you when you're moving forward with your clinical work.
Yes, because now I can outsmart all of them like an evil genius.
I mean, you've always been somewhat of an evil genius, but now you're just out of control. They've created a monster.
Yes. So now let's talk about the negative side, because there's quite a bit.
Let's just start with cost.
Oh, yeah.
When I think of observership, I just think poor IMGs that are being exploited for thousands of dollars with the promise of an interview. It is disappointing. A lot of the processes in Australia disappoint me because of how I just feel that they're trying to make money.
So it is the money is the downside. Like after all the things you have to pay, now you got to pay for the observership program. But
you get an interview at the end. So I suppose that can justify the money in a lot of cases.
Yeah. But also factor in, you better do that interview really well. Don't just think, I've got an interview, I've got my foot in the door. You need to master.
Yes, you guarantee the interview, not the job.
Yeah, you guarantee the interview, not the job. Perfectly said. You need to master that interview. And we're going to try to help you with that. Like, we are working on a interview prep course, one specifically for doctors, for, in the medical industry. But we have lots of tips and strategies on that as well, as somebody that has done observership interviews and has interviewed for jobs. Now can combine the two sides and definitely tell you, some tips and some strategies.
And I think after 6 to 8 weeks working in that environment, you'd have quite a good idea of the kind of answers or how they would like you to interview. So I think that's also quite a good benefit of the Observership program, rather than just going blindly into an interview. You get to know the institution a little, you get to know the admin staff a little.
But sometimes, like, if you got a position on the Observership program after you interviewed for it, sometimes you don't know what you did right, that's why you got chosen over the others. Because there's definitely something when I interview I'm looking for. And I'm not going to share it here, but I'll definitely share it when we talk about interviews. So yeah, you just don't know, like, what did I do so right that I need to emphasize in the actual interview for a job.
And sometimes it might be that you didn't do much right in the interviews. I mean, I've had a lot of interviews go right for me where I know that the interview didn't feel right to me, but I would still get I still got the position, but it was only because they were desperate, or because, I was the only one that applied, or something like that.
Or maybe your clinical history, like your clinical practice history, because
you're
good on paper, carried you.
But my actual interview was shocking.
They're probably like, this girl's a dud in real life, but hey, her CV looks good. Where with me, they can't say that, because my CV cannot be as good as yours. So this is what I'm saying. Literally my only hope, at least you can fall back on your CV. My only hope
is your personality.
Is my personality, which actually, saying that out loud, Jesus Christ, that's probably not.
They probably see me they probably interview me and they're like, wow, she seemed good on paper, but why is she so slow in real life? Like, use your words. They probably want me to do well so badly and I just tank it every time. It's because interviews make me nervous. But I mean, that's true. Like, sometimes I've gotten through and the interview didn't feel good, so I don't know what I did right to get through. I don't know what the circumstances were.
Look, and sometimes with IMGs and getting your foot in the door, sometimes you've got to have that factor, which is luck. And that's something that only the stars aligned and the universe can happen for you.
But you can make the stars align. You can make your own luck in some places.
You can increase your chances for the stars to align, but sometimes it is that little bit of luck.
Yeah.
So the negative side is cost.
I feel like another negative is that it's not a structured program. Like, it's really on you about like how much you get out of it.
Yeah.
You have to be quite a diligent learner and a keen learner to get a lot from the program.
On paper, it looks really structured, because I've seen it on paper and I'm like, oh, okay, this is really structured. But as the junior doctor that has had observers join her team, in practice, it's a schmozzle of a mess.
Yes.
And like you said, you have to be sort of a proactive learner to make it worth your while. But also you need to know what is exactly that I need to be focusing on. And like, unless you had a friend who's done the observership program that's given you good advice, and not everyone does, like what we mentioned earlier with some of the priorities that you should focus on.
You might have friends that have done the observership program wrong. They probably just didn't know what advice to give you.
That's right. So maybe like after people listening to this podcast, they can get more out of it. So that things might turn around in that sense, that it's not necessarily a con. I guess the other con is, from going off what you're saying, like it is a bit of an unstructured mess, especially clinically on the wards.
But that's not unique to the observership program. Like, to be fair, the medical students are the same as well. I just feel like even with observers, you don't know what their hours are. Like, if they didn't pitch, you wouldn't know.
No.
Like, as the person trying to help them.
Yeah.
So it really is up to them that they pitch and show initiative and take some of the learning in themselves.
The other downside is, I guess, the environment you're in, because we have talked about it so many times. These junior doctors are overworked, and if you don't have an IMG junior doctor that would empathize with your situation. You might have a local doctor. They don't care for you. That's the reality. Like, it will have to take a very, very, very special, local, kind-hearted, amazing human being, junior doctor for them to even care. There are a few out there, definitely. But
few and far between.
Yeah, but majority of them aren't. Majority of them are like, this is not my job. I don't get paid for this. And like, these are all valid statements.
And most of them aren't malicious. Like,
no,
they're struggling themselves. Like,
that's right.
They've just started becoming doctors, not like within that year. So it's a lot for them to also teach someone else.
And the reality is, you do slow them down in the work if they have to like supervise you to bleed a patient or you know, have you write notes. You do slow them down, and
especially when they're running off their feet trying to keep up all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is not a judgment thing on them, but this is just the reality that we need to be aware of. So that's the downside. Like, you could join a team and just feel uncomfortable and unwanted, really. The other downside, I mean, I guess it's not really adds to recency of practice, but it just means that...
I suppose it looks better than nothing, though.
It looks better than nothing. That's right. Yeah. So those are really the downsides.
Oh, one more downside I can think of is that you might have to stay somewhere random for 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
That's not easy to move away from your family for that long time, and that's added expenses as well. So over and above the fee, the observership program fee, you're not working, you forked out that large amount of money, and then you're still paying accommodation and food and transport in a random place.
Yeah, and actually that just reminded me of something. You know, most of the people that I see doing the observership program are females. And I think because they're the ones with a career gap, because they've got kids, they had to take time off. And so...
That makes sense.
And that what you're saying, like, you have to be away from your family potentially, especially if your kids got school, then they have to stay in school. You have to be away from your family and your kids to do this. So it's not nice. It's not nice. I mean... like me, I left my husband in Sydney to do an internship. I took the dog, of course, because I cannot live without my dog. Can live without the husband from time to time. But that's not even my child. Like, can you imagine if I had my child back then? There's no way. I don't think I could do it.
There's no way you would have.
But these women sacrifice so much. And like, some of their stories are amazing.
It's interesting that you say that it's mostly women doing the observership.
Yeah, because they're the ones with the career gaps.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
More than the male IMG. You know, especially if overseas they, you know, stopped working for a bit, had their babies, and then migrated to Australia. They're married to doctors. The doctors don't really have that career gap.
I also feel that, like, it might also be women that are attracted to the observership program, because in general, like, obviously this is not true for everyone, but I've seen that IMG women, although they can be so good and really good doctors and clinicians, they usually doubt themselves much more than the men. Like, they're not as confident. And I think the observership program gives them sort of that, maybe a confidence boost that they needed.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point.
Yeah, because they would be worried to just go straight into the workplace without having done something, you know, in between.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. So another thing I want to touch on is what rotations do you get in the observership program, and what rotations we would recommend.
Do you get to choose?
No. But I have to...
So you pay $8,000, you don't get to choose?
No, because it's the hospital, their way or the highway. But there's something I want to say about this, because I see it quite often with observership program participants, is that they'll complain about certain rotations and they want to be moved out of those rotations. When I actually see the rotation, I'm like, that is actually the best place you can be. And I'm going to give you an example. So generally speaking, you'll get most programs, it varies from hospital to hospital, but you'll get a bit of time in emergency medicine, which is great. You'll get a bit of time in medicine, general medicine, and then you'll get a bit of time either in general surgery or a surgical specialty. Now, some of the observers go to the rehab ward, and that's where we hear the most complaints. Oh, it's too slow. Oh, it's too boring. Oh, like, can I go somewhere else? And I just think, what are you talking about? As an IMG, even if you're an IMG this is your first year of actual work, getting sent to the rehab ward is the best place for learning, because generally the rehab ward doesn't have ward rounds every day. So you have more of an opportunity to do some proactive learning. You're also partnered up a lot with the physios and the occupational therapists, and that's where the discharge planning is really done. And you can see how they all fit into these things. And you get to know your occupational therapist really well. You sit with them, you're like, can you explain to me, what do you guys do? What do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? So it's actually the place in the hospital that you have time to sort of see how the whole picture adds together. You have
a lot of allied health meetings and things.
Yes, you do. Yeah. Yep, you do. So you get to see like A to Z really. But a lot of people complain that it's too slow. And I'm like, hold on here. If you're complaining it's too slow, you're not getting what you should be getting out of that
And this
rotation.
is what I mean, that these people need self-directed learning, and that's difficult. So I can understand how some people would get allocated to rehab and say, but I'm not getting enough. I'm not getting ward rounds. I'm not getting constant interaction with the doctors. I'm not getting this. I'm not getting that, because they don't know how to direct their own learning.
No.
So if you expect the observership program to be like that, and I'm sure maybe some hospitals have a more structured program, I don't think that most of the programs are like that. I think you're going to have to take initiative.
You do, but remember as well, even as a doctor, your first rotation, you've got to have initiative. Initiative is actually what's going to get you through.
100%.
If you're going to sit back and wait for things to fall into your lap, you're going to fail. You really are. So yes, a lot of people don't know what they should be getting out of these rotations. Like I said, maybe hearing our podcast, now you'll know what you should try to work on. But rehab's the best place to do that, because you get to have these connections with all the allied health staff. You can even have time to speak to the nurses, time to even learn the bloods and the cannulation part, because they're all subacute patients. So it's just a little bit slower, that the junior doctor isn't like feeling so overwhelmed by your presence if you're on acute ward like medicine, things like that.
That's so true. And I think I would argue that the rehab ward has probably got the most to learn in terms of like first world processes that you would not have seen before. The discharge planning, the occupational health, like I just said, allied health members meeting.
Yeah.
That's not something I had attended before I came here.
Yeah.
So all of these little new things are probably all bundled together into the rehab ward.
Yeah. So I actually started off in a medical board, Jane Med, as an intern. And then my second rotation was rehab. And
this is why you're advocating for rehab.
I loved it.
You had a great time.
No, actually, because a lot of the patients were crumbly and like they still had acute issues, even though they weren't meant to. But it really got me. So when I was on the Gen Med ward, I would always go, what does this word mean? Like regarding discharge planning, like, why can't we just discharge them? Why do they need this ACAT assessment? What is this ACAT assessment? When I got to rehab, I actually got a chance to put it all together. Like we would have our allied health meeting ward rounds. So we would sit with the consultant, the registrar, the allied health members would sit with us, the physio members would sit with us, the nurses would sit with us, and we talk about the patients, like where they're at. The allied health will go, we think that they could actually be discharged in about 2 weeks if there's no like acute medical issues, or we need to do this, that. We need to get an ACAT assessment. And it gave me an opportunity, like, okay, this is my chance to learn and ask these people. So I started networking and becoming friends with OTs. And they even like provided me one of their like cheat sheets on all the occupational therapist acronyms.
Can I get that cheat sheet?
It's so good, because it's like, I've got to find it. But I mean, it was like, they'll tell me, well, FASF means this.
I was just about to say, when I came here, I was like, what the hell is a FASF?
Yeah.
And FASF +1 -2 or whatever. Like, they say like FASF, mobilizing with FASF +1 or something.
It's like reading another language that by the time
horrible.
I finished in rehab, I was fluent in this language. This is where it was my time to actually put all those pieces together.
That would be very valuable.
Oh, it was awesome. And also it was a little bit slow paced. So I was like, okay, wow, I can catch my breath and I can like really focus on the stuff that I'm going to need for the surgical wards and ED, because they're really fast. And
very smart.
If I suck there, like I'm going to get noticed for sucking. So this is my time to work on my stuff so I look good in those rotations where it's less forgiving. Yeah.
I would argue that like ortho is 50% ortho, 50% rehab anyway.
Yes.
Like you'd need all those skills for ortho.
Oh, you do. You actually do. So that's really important, like regarding the rotations. You can make anything out of each rotation. So overall, that's the Observership Program. We are going to have another podcast on the Observership Program from someone who did the Observership Program, just to give you a bit of extra information. But if you ask me overall, is it worth it? My answer is yes, with a condition. If you go to a hospital that genuinely needs you, so your chance of getting hired is much higher, then yes, it is worth it.
It's also more worth it, I think, if you go into the program with these set strategies that you're going to take.
Yes.
So, there is really ways to maximize it, and there's also ways that you can do this that will waste your time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope that was extremely helpful to you guys. Now, we have a Facebook and an Instagram. So if you're not following us, please type in Code You Australia and click the follow button. We have a YouTube channel where all these videos go to. And actually, we send them there first. So a lot of our YouTube subscribers have already figured out that they get early access to most of our content. So if you're not subscribing to us, please go to YouTube, Code You Australia, and hit the subscribe button. So you don't miss out on any more videos. It's been great chatting with you guys, and we'll catch you in the next podcast.